All right, the Velshi Book Club is in session. We are talking about the Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie, and joining me to discuss is the author's friend, Professor Homi K. Bhabha, who was supposed to be on tour with Rushdie right now. Professor Bhabha is also a professor of humanities, English, and comparative literature at Harvard University. He's the author of numerous works exploring cultural change, colonial and post-colonial theory. Professor, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you, Ali.
You and Salman were in the middle of a three-city conversation series. You were supposed to be heading to L.A. next week. He's your friend. You've known him for a long time. How are you doing with this news?
Well, it's in terrible shock. I was thrown off because, in fact, Salman had sent me the draft copy of his new novel, The Proofs, just the day before he was stabbed in this assassination attempt. So it's really been a hideous few days, to tell you the truth. And it makes me think that people so misunderstand the Satanic Verses when they see it only as a problem of free speech. Of course, there is a problem of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. But fundamentally, the novel is about the right to change, for migrants to have the right to change, to transform their lives, for literature to have the right to translate great traditional works, for migrants to have the right to change the public culture and the politics of metropolitan cities, the post-colonials having the right to change the whole history of colonized societies. So it's great, fundamentally, I think his passion, Salman's passion, is about the right to change and the right to transform, not only the right to free speech, which of course is very important.
So, in fact, you talk in your book, The Locations of Culture, you argue that the most subversive aspect of the Satanic Verses is placing sacred material from the Quran into the secular context of a novel. It's not actually about the prophet. It's something entirely different. Tell me a little bit more about this, because for people who haven't, I mean, this may be the most famous book that some people haven't read, right? It's right. A lot of people haven't read it, but everybody knows the name and everybody knows the author.
Yes, I do believe that in fact, what Salman is trying to do there is to think about the cultural values of translation, because a lot of literature is about translation. Think about John Cotsea's recent migration novels, which draw so much on Cervantes. So I think what he was trying to do was to place a religious text in the context of migrants who had moved from their own faith and were trying to recreate a sense of what it was like to live with their beliefs, but in a very different moment, in a very different cultural milieu. I think that's what Salman was trying to do. And let's not forget, Ali, that the main target of the book is Mrs. Thatcher.
Right.
It is Mrs. Thatcher who at that time was rolling back a number of freedoms to do with the welfare state. Mrs. Thatcher is the real, the attack is on Mrs. Thatcher and on a certain kind of neo-Tory politics, which are not so dissimilar to the kind of neo-ethnic politics that we have now. She was playing many of the same cards. And you know, the other thing, Ali, I think that we should remember is that that there are various different kinds of Islam. South Asian Islam, the Islam from which Salman rose, is an Islam where there is a lot of back and forth. There is questions of translation. There are ironic songs. It does not demand the same kind of monolithic interpretation that some traditions of Islam demand. And I say this because, very often there is a kind of Islamophobia that does not understand the different traditions of freedom and fealty within the Islamic tradition.
And
I think we should avoid that.
And in fact, a real misinterpretation, by the way, about what Islam embraces and forbids in terms of speech and expression and art. There's a few people who've given Islam a very bad name about this whole thing. But let's talk about the controversy itself and the way in which those of us who argue for free speech and do things like this have to think about controversy. I want to go to the Charlie Hebdo attack in 2015. The literary institution PEN, which has been very vocal in support of Salman Rushdie this week, they presented the survivors with an award for their courage. And a number of PEN members wrote in opposition in a letter. They wrote, "There is a critical difference between staunchly supporting expression that violates the acceptable and enthusiastically rewarding such expression." I find that an interesting protest. What do you make of that in reference to Salman Rushdie?
I think the actual reference is not so convincing myself. I think that the Charlie Hebdo had a long tradition of satiric and caricatural traditions in the material, the cartoons, etc., that they produced. And they had a different kind of perspective and a different kind of attack than Salman. I don't think Salman went out in a way to caricature Islam. I think he was trying to translate it, as you said in your introduction, into a magical realist moment, into a magical realist form. Mm-hmm. Maybe that succeeded in some circles brilliantly, failed in others. But it was not pointedly political the way in which Charlie Hebdo was, I believe. I still think that killing is no kind of criticism. It is no way of enlightening an audience. It is no way of broadening a discussion. Absolutely not. But I do think there is a distinction between what Salman was doing in the Satanic Verses and what Charlie Hebdo was doing. They're two different cultural forms.